Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Monday, June 3rd. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, the Toronto Blue Jays, the stretch that we declared, the stretch to save their season, has come to an end, and they went 8-5 over those 13 games after we said they needed to go 9-4. How are we feeling about that?
Is that not so typical of these Blue Jays? The benchmark we said 9 wins. 9 wins would get them back to 500. It was an easy stretch. They'd be able to work through this stretch and get back and reset from here. And that one extra loss to the Pirates, of course, costs them the opportunity to return to 500. But a series win nonetheless, if not a little bit unconvincing. And the Blue Jays now turn their attention to the Baltimore Orioles.
Yeah, I think we are in the months where we officially are going to know what happens with this 2024 Blue Jays team, whether they stick with the team until the end or if we see them turn their eyes towards 2025. And that kind of starts with the Orioles this week. I mean, I know that they have the A's after the Orioles and kind of this 7-game week, but after that they go Milwaukee, Cleveland, Boston, and then the Yankees, where I believe Garrett Cole will be back. So tough sledding ahead, and it's not been a convincing stretch of play, to say the least, for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, I mean, convincing, definitely not the word I would use to describe these wins, although they did pick up a number of them. So, I mean, you can't really complain as far as them turning it into something and being able to use this stretch to get close, at least, to 500. But they've had this opportunity to face off against some weaker teams. And now we see what they're made of, because that stretch to save the season was really just, if they fell apart, then you knew that this team was selling off by the start of June. But they've perhaps delayed the inevitable, which is that they picked up those wins and now they've got a tough sled. Now, of course, the Athletics in just a couple of days are a bit of a reprieve, because the Orioles, we know, are not going to be an easy opponent. But now is where they've got to make up their ground. Now they've had this stretch to stabilize or normalize a little bit. They are hovering right around 500, just 2 games under. And now you've got to win games against good teams.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to get your thoughts, kind of just looking at this 13-game stretch, because they go 5-1 against the White Sox, and they go, what would it be? It would be 3-4 against the Tigers and Pirates. And like, obviously you got to take care of business where you got to take care of business with the White Sox series. But I think, like, looking at the other 2 series in that, like, they go below 500 against 2 teams that the Blue Jays should be better than, right? And the Pirate series, I mean, like, we can kind of go game by game. I mean, game 1 is the 14-inning marathon where it seemed like neither team wanted to win. They, trade scoreless innings in extra innings. They trade runs in extra innings. They get a runner on third with 1 out, can't get him in. Runner on third with no outs, can't get him in. Before Davis Schneider, of course, makes them 1-0 in the city connects with walk-off home run. And I mean, we can maybe talk about Schneider a little bit, but like, not necessarily the most convincing win, I would say. Like, it's a win, and the vibes are high after a walk-off win, of course, and that's something to be excited about. But as far as like what it says about the team long term, not great. And then game 2, Mitch Keller just obliterates them. It felt like they lost in the first inning when they went down after the Brian Hayes home run. And then in game 3, like, Daniel Vogelbach he had a great weekend. But again, like a 5-4 win. I'm like not complaining about how that one went down, but again, it's not there wasn't a ton, I think, to take away from that, other than Vogelbach is kind of rounding into form nicely with the more playing time that he sees.
Yeah, and the timing of that probably couldn't be coming at a better spot, given some of the recent happenings in the minor leagues and the upper minors for the Blue Jays. But yeah, Daniel Vogelbach, I believe, is a top 10 hitter in baseball right now over the last couple of weeks by, I think it was WOBA. I saw it tweeted out just a few hours ago, earlier today. I mean, This was a big Daniel Vogelbach series, and the Blue Jays needed that, I'd say, in a lot of respects, given that just there's been so little hitting at times for this team. So to get him going a little bit here, and if he is going to be getting at bats, given some configuration changes that we will also be getting into, then I mean, you need that, right? I mean, listen, Joey Votto doesn't seem like a real person at this point. No idea what he's doing. And then you've got some options in the high minors, as mentioned, but it's really just about Vogelbach finding his game and picking it up. And for him to do that during this series, I think was really important, just in a number of respects, right? Listen, like, he had been pretty bad. So you might have been reaching the end of the rope with him. So to pick up a couple of big extra base hits, he had that one hit to the alley in game 3. Like, he looked the part of a 3/4 of your time DH.
Yeah, I mean he went 5 for 9 in the series with 3 singles and 2 doubles and like 4 RBI. And even in game 1, he had the ball where I think it was G1 Bay. He lost it in the lights and it went off the wall, and he had the like, he probably catches it if he sees it, but it was a ball off the wall regardless. So a double scores a run there. And for him, we kind of talk about the Blue Jays move to move Vladdy to third to be able to get more offense in, where you can argue all you want about if getting all three of Vladdy, Justin Turner, and Daniel Vogelbach in the lineup is in fact getting more offense in. But it's interesting to see them like actually kind of selling out for offense, and then having Vogelbach like get kind of some consistent playing time and kind of get into or get on a roll. And I think that kind of just speaks to how tough it is to be like a part-time player at the major league level, where you don't really know, well, you don't know where your playing time is going to come from most of the time. And when you do get to play, there's a lot of pressure on that, because if you don't perform, then you won't get to play. And if you do perform, then maybe you'll get to see some more time. So into like great time for him to kind of break through. I know obviously we'll talk about Horwitz a bit later, and just with the way that the lineup was structured for that game.
Yeah, and I also want to get into Vlad. I want to dive into that, but I do want to give just a little bit more flowers to Vogelbach, right? I think that with that lineup configuration, I think you can make that work. Now, I mean, we'll see exactly how that goes as far as selling out for offense, because it's so antithetical to how the Blue Jays have more or less operated under this current regime. So I don't know if that's really something that we're going to be seeing in any meaningful stretches. But also, I think it's also worth acknowledging that even if that is how things shake down, you end up with Vlad at third, and that pushes IKF to second, and then that pushes Schneider out to left, and that pushes Kiermaier out of the lineup and puts Varsho in center. Like, all these defensive changes, they're to put a guy like a Turner or a Vogelbach in, but also those two are really kind of where it centers around. And it doesn't have to be Justin Turner if he isn't producing, because you've got other guys that you can shuffle in there at first, and you can shuffle in at DH that, if Turner continues to struggle, you're still going to have guys where you can add offensive punch to this lineup.
If you were the manager of the Toronto Blue Jays and you were building a lineup tonight to face Grayson Rodriguez, what is your, like, not necessarily batting order, but who are the 9 that you're running out? Go around the diamond.
Well, the only thing is that I don't think that you can make Vlad anything more than a very casual third baseman, because that's really just the question, right?
Really? Why? Why?
What do you mean he's Gold Glove defense? The guy setting a career high in defensive runs. Well, let's get into Vlad a little bit here.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I thought he looked the part of a third baseman, which is an almost unfathomable thing to say, but he made 2 really good plays. The spinning play out at shortstop was something I didn't know he had in his bag. If this is how he's going to look, and we had heard prior to the game that he had stayed hot for like the last 2 years. And they said something on the broadcast about when Vlad switched glove suppliers, he made sure to say, hey, make sure I get some third base gloves as well. So this is something that Vlad has had in the pipeline for months, if not years now, right? And listen, defensive metrics are fake as they are. Like, let's be totally honest here. If he can fake it at third base, can you imagine what that does for this team? Like, you're trading basically a first baseman with 5 home runs for a third baseman with a 130 WRC plus.
Yeah, that's
That's
just
how it works, right?
different players. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the third baseman, or the Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the first baseman. Who would you
but
rather
but
have?
but they actually, like, they are different players because Vlad at first base can't hack it, but you can. There's a lot more tolerance for a worse hitter, and in some respects, almost like a worse defender, because at first base, obviously, it's not a premium position. You almost forget about first base defense, right? But also the bar for hitting is exponentially higher, right? So I don't expect Vlad to be anything more than competent at third base, and that might even be a little bit of an aggressive statement. But I also wonder if you can sell a little bit of the defense there because he's still hitting as a third baseman at a position where the bat isn't as much of a priority in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, you can look back like in 2019 when he comes up as a rookie, like he has -3 defensive run saves and -20 outs above average, and the outs above average was like the worst um, per inning outs above average season in the Statcast era, basically. So obviously, you don't you if you get that Vlad, like you can't leave him there, especially with the way that Bo's defense has been down a little bit this year. I think like sacrificing that much on the left side of your infield when you've already put so many of your eggs in the run prevention basket, like you can't cost your pitchers that much on the left side of the infield just to get Daniel Vogelbach's bat in the lineup. And I'm curious to see because if Vladdy is playing third base and let's say Justin Turner continues to struggle, like do we see Daniel Vogelbach pull out his glove? Does he even have a glove to play first base so that you can get Danny Jansen into the lineup as a DH or Alejandro Kirk into the lineup at DH? Like it'll be interesting to see. And I mean, it does feel a little bit like Spencer Horwitz is forcing the move, maybe. I don't know if you agree with that or whether it's they're just at the point where they got to try what they can do to get some more runs across the plate.
Well, here's also what I wonder is that this team for so long has prioritized positional versatility. I mean, you look at a guy like Kevin Biggio
Yeah.
being a guy that plays every position and, can't hit his weight half the time, but sticks around and is a guy that this front office values to the nth degree, right? So why not have Vlad be a guy with some positional versatility, right? It only adds value in theory because it gives you more permutations. Now, whether those permutations work because he's so poor defensively at third is something that we're going to learn probably over the next month or so, maybe over the next couple of weeks. But I mean, to me, the only guys that don't have positional versatility on this Blue Jays team are Bo Bichette and Vlad Guerrero Jr. And for the most part, the reason that was kind of accepted was because they were just cornerstones, and you could lock them in at first base and shortstop respectively every single game. Well, all of a sudden, Vlad isn't the same Vlad that you thought he'd be. So, okay, so let's make him a little bit more positionally versatile. And you look at a guy like Bo Bichette, listen, if he continues to struggle at shortstop, like who's to say that putting IKF there and shuffling him to second wouldn't be a bit more of an optimal move? Like to me, it'd be more of a managing personalities thing. But if Bo's gonna struggle and you want these guys to have positional versatility, then I don't see why you would make an exception for Bo.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting conversation because for Vladdy being moved off first base is almost seen as like a promotion. You know what I mean? Like he's moving up the defensive index. And for him, I feel like that's, pretty exciting. Something that he obviously wants to do. He obviously considered himself a third baseman. I remember it was like a long time where his Instagram bio read third base and he didn't want to like take it out, even though he'd been playing first base like all the time. And for Bo, like that would be seen as a demotion, and not only a demotion, but like something that would cost him in free agency, right? Like if he's a second baseman, he's earning significantly less in theory than he would as a shortstop, even if he's a poor defensive shortstop.
But I wonder if there's also like two sides to that coin, because what if he switches to second and the defense holds, right? The problem with him is that he's got a very strong arm, even if it's a little bit inaccurate at times. And it's the range that's kind of like he's just kind of fringy almost across the board, right? Other than he's got a really talented arm. So in theory, he actually would make some sense maybe as a third baseman, just because he's maybe a little bit. It's weird. Like the arm strength, I think, is there. It's the ability to consistently make the throws that, to me, are the thing that cost him the most. So, like, listen, if he moved to second base and his range profile, so to speak, fit the position better, and he actually turned out to be a really exceptional defensive second baseman, it's going to cost him money, but it's also probably not going to lose him as much money as it would when a team goes and sees he can't play short. And they're kind of like, well, he's not a shortstop in this market.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like you look at the Marcus Semien contract that he got from Texas, and obviously, like the guy coming off a season where he hit 40 home runs and set the second base home run record, and of course I think he went into free agency considering himself a shortstop, but then they signed Corey Seager and paid him like a shortstop anyways. So, I mean, for Bo, these guys are like professionals and they're proud of who they are as players. So I think it would be a hit to the pride for him to move off shortstop, and he's never played a major league inning at any other position, which is pretty wild because I feel like, eventually at some point, like it would make sense to just kind of slide guys around, and they've had guys who you consider better defensive shortstops than him on the roster anyways, and they've just like never shifted him off that position. So I would be very curious if like that is even a conversation that they've even had as an organization.
I think as the desperation level for this team mounts, I think it's a discussion that they might end up having to have. And again, like it doesn't sound like either Vlad or Bo are going anywhere anytime soon. We heard from Ross Atkins over the weekend actually about it. So if they are going to be long-term pieces here, like when do you start having the Bo conversation about his defensive abilities at shortstop?
Well, he made like a significant leap last year, right? Where he was above average by defensive runs saved, and like he posted outside of 2020 like his best defensive season by outs above average. And like this year it's he's -4 DRS and -4 OAA, which are both like trending to be not his career worst, but like close to his career worst. So I don't know, like is like what's going on with him this year, because like it's not like he's giving you that value at the plate that kind of makes that okay.
It's not palatable with Bo's offense this year, right? So eventually it's a discussion that's going to have to be had.
Yeah, I don't really know like what the direction is. And I mean, let's talk about Spencer Horwitz a little bit, because he has been exceptional at AAA this year, and I said, like I think that plays a role into what they're doing with Vladdy right now, because they're maybe trying to find a spot from our offense. Obviously, Horwitz has been playing some second base in AAA. I don't think that he's going to come up to the majors and be a second baseman necessarily, but he had that big game on, I believe it was Saturday, where he went 5 for 6 with a homer and two doubles and 6 RBI. And he's, I mean, you kind of look at his stats on the year, and he's hitting 332, he's reaching base 451 and slugging 500. Like, how do you value that, looking at it just in the context of the Vlad decision and Horwitz having like such a great game on Saturday and then Vlad moving to third base on Sunday?
Well, I would be shocked if they were related. That much I think is a fair thing to say. I don't think that any of Vlad's decisions are being made with Spencer Horwitz in mind. Now, with that said, Horwitz seems like a guy that is too good for AAA. And maybe he's just a quadruple A guy, but it's kind of a case of where does he fit into the mix? Because, he's kind of a corner outfielder, but not really, especially given the makeup of this team and the type of outfielders they value. And then at first base, you've got kind of Vlad with a hammer lock. Now maybe he opens it up a little bit, but then are you willing to DFA Justin Turner for
Do you
for Spencer Horwitz? Are
do you think
you
that it would be Turner though? Like is that a situation where you bring
well?
up Horwitz and that's the Kevin Biggio or that's the Ernie Clement? Um, like Ernie Clement would have to be DFA'd, and I figure that he would probably be picked up somewhere else. Kevin Biggio, I believe he can be options, or does he have more than 5 years of service?
So with Biggio, I'll give that a look and see what he's at for service time. But I I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm willing to give up the positional versatility of Ernie Clement for Spencer Horwitz's bat because I'm not convinced you're getting anything more than a slightly above average hitter with Horwitz. I think with Clement, his defense has not been good this year. So I think that's just kind of a case of just you like the ability to play multiple positions, a little bit of a Santiago Espinal almost situation, but I don't know that kind of trade-off, especially if you're likely to lose Clement, is worth your time. But I just don't know where you get Horwitz in.
Yeah, I think that's the tough part for him, right? Like if he was a if he was Nathan Lucas, like I think he's in the big leagues already. If he's a left fielder primarily who can play some center field, I would say he's probably already in the big leagues. But the fact that he is a first baseman who can stand in the outfield where they already have, Vlad playing first base. They already have Justin Turner, who obviously they don't feel comfortable with him playing third base anymore because or else he probably would have just played third base yesterday and Vlad would have played first. And you have Daniel Vogelbach who's starting to heat up a little bit. Like I think Horwitz would be on the roster if he had a different position, which is of course why they've tried him out in the outfield, which is why they've tried him out at second base. But I mean, I think you're right. Like when you look at what he fits in as a or kind of like as or where he profiles as like a slightly above league average bat. Like his steamer projection has him as a 118 WRC plus bat at the major league, so 18% better than league average. I think the Blue Jays could probably use a hitter like that. But also, if you look at his numbers last year at AAA, so last year at AAA, he slashed 337, 450, 495. And again, this year at AAA, it's 332, 451, 500. So not very big. Like he's been the same hitter this year as he was last year at AAA. And at the major league level last year, he slashed 256, 341, 385. So do you think that there's been any actual improvements there, or does he just seem like the exact same hitter that would come up and probably produce a line similar to the one that he did in his 44 plate appearances with
I
the
mean,
team
this
last
this
year?
all this all sounds like it's driven by the hit tool, not the power tool, right? And that's really what the Blue Jays are looking for from a guy that would fill the role that Horwitz would be filling, right? They're a team right now that lacks power. So adding another guy without any, it doesn't make any sense. Now, I do want to add this very quickly. Kevin Biggio at this point is at 4 years, 129 days of MLB service time, and he has three options. So in theory, still optionable for another realistically couple of months. He will eventually reach 5 years of service time during this season, but as of now is optionable without needing to basically ask his permission because at the 5 year mark, they get the ability to say, I'm not going down there. An opportunity to refuse demotion.
Yeah, he's super. I mean, here's like with Biggio, like I to me, I think that's almost the direction that I would go. I don't see a huge cost opportunity with sending him down at this point. Like since the middle of April, he has 8 hits in 80 plate appearances. He's hitting 125 since April 17th, 53 WRC plus, slugging 188. That's 2 extra base hits and striking out 33% of the time. Like I think Spencer Horwitz is giving you more than that. And I like Spencer Horwitz, you can play right field. You know, like if that's why you're keeping Biggio, because he can play second base, first base, and right field, like you can put Spencer Horwitz in the outfield. And you can put Ernie Clement in the outfield if you need to, right? Like if you're that concerned about the outfield depth, well, at least Horwitz is able to play there. And he's going to give you more with the bat. I would almost guarantee that.
Like, are you just shuffling deck chairs though? Because to me, I don't know that the difference between even Kevin Biggio and Spencer Horwitz is that substantial. And it's also like I think that part of it too is the ability to play second base for them is really important. They have enough outfielders. They have, they're 4 dudes that they can play out there. And then like you've got Clement, Schneider, but if you lose the second baseman, then Schneider, it's all kind of like machinations, right? Like every roster move affects how much you're able to play other guys in other positions, right? So I think that Biggio, in some respects, is a bit of like a glue guy, not even like in the clubhouse, but in his ability to cover those positions when another guy gets pulled elsewhere.
I just think that yes, he's able to do that, but so is David Schneider, so is IKF, so is Ernie Clement. Like those guys have all played second base, third base, like some shortstop, some outfield over the past couple of years, whether it be at AAA or at the major league level. And obviously, the Blue Jays are at the point where they're willing to sacrifice some defensive ability, as they showed by moving Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to third base for some offense. So why does Kevin Biggio, who yes, he gives you that defensive versatility, but so do 3 other guys on the roster. Why does he get to go 8 for 80 and stay on the big league roster when you have a guy who I would nearly guarantee would go better than 8 for 80 in that stretch?
I mean, yeah, it's just a matter of positional versus that's the only logical thing is positional versatility.
I mean, we talked about it coming into the year, right? Like where they, defensive versatility was the name of the roster coming in, where they had Ernie Clement, Santiago Espinal, blah, 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 like all these guys, right? Like, and of course they had to move Espinal because they couldn't keep them all. And I just don't see much of a difference between Kevin Biggio and Ernie Clement. Like, are they serving different purposes on the roster right now when neither is hitting especially well? And yes, one's right-handed and one's left-handed, but who cares when neither of them are hitting?
There's no offensive profile whatsoever, right? So I think that it's probably a thing that's going to get louder and louder as Horwitz continues to hit and Clement and Biggio continue to not. I just don't really know if it's something that this team has the appetite for.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's tough to send guys down and it's tough to make like big decisions based on 2 months, based on 100 plate appearances, based on a month of play or whatever. But I just think that the team talks about showing desperation and sometimes doesn't quite act on it in the ways that you think a team needing runs would kind of lean towards making these decisions.
Yeah, yeah. And I would figure, like I said, like when things do get desperate, they're gonna have to make a move, right? I wonder maybe it's just a case of them feeling that now that they're approaching 500, they've got a little bit more runway. But I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm not gonna presume to know exactly what's going through their heads.
I mean, like if they do end up retooling at the deadline or whatever, like if that's kind of the direction that the season goes, like there's no doubt that like Horwitz and Elvis will be getting Barger, they'll be getting their shots at the major league level to kind of see. I figure, like Justin Turner will probably get moved. I don't know what you would get for him at this point, but at least that opens that up. Like Vogelbach, there would be no point to have him in the lineup over Spencer Horwitz. Um, yeah, I think that's like maybe that's the all it takes is kind of them to make that decision to flip that switch or whatever. But we can talk about the Ross Atkins comment that you alluded to earlier. He was on MLB Network Radio and was asked about trading Vlad and Bo, and he basically said that's not something we've really talked about, and it doesn't make sense for us. So I think that we are both kind of on the same page there, where a Vlad and Bo trade at this point would just not make, like he said, it wouldn't make sense. It's not the way that you want to go about with your two stars when your farm system is that bad and you like reasonably could be good again in 2025. What did you make of the appearance overall?
I mean, that's really the big quote that made the rounds was, of course, the comments on Vlad and Bo and the Blue Jays' unwillingness to part from either of them. And he'd also had mentioned that there were some they were hoping really to keep them to re-sign them, which I think is pretty much the first confirmation we've really gotten that this front office is making a concerted effort to do so, because certainly that's not what we've heard from the player side. To me, I think the Ross Atkins quote about not being willing to trade both of them obviously it's the big meaty part to chew on. And it's something that is interesting that they would commit to almost at this point in the season. I get that you can go back on it, you can, you know, decide that you are going to deal them, but to slam the door on it in totality, even if again, as we said, doesn't make a ton of sense, still I think is very interesting, very compelling to me that they did decide to do so.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, like is it just front office for him? I know in the interview he said that he was disappointed to see the report that suggested otherwise, like about the report that came out. He that they had conversations with other teams. He said he was disappointed to see that, and whether he's disappointed to see that because he doesn't want other teams leaking those conversations or because those conversations didn't happen, I mean, that's kind of the read between the lines, if you will, there. But I do you think that there's any way that he is saying this as a way to save face or a way to maybe up the package offers that they've gotten for the two?
Well, it's kind of both, right? This guy, everything he does is very calculated and in
Yeah.
respect to his media and things of that kind of nature. So I mean, listen, everything we'd heard, I think it was Arden Zwelling that had even said a couple of weeks ago that he would be shocked if Vlad or Bo were actually moved. So this is really just kind of reiterating that point. But it's still feels like it's not a door that they can necessarily close. If June rolls around and they just get absolutely demolished by what is going to be an extremely tough schedule, then it's an avenue worth exploring. And they've flirted with it, but they haven't really given it any substantial investigation. And this is the time, if you're going to investigate moving off either of them, to do so. I don't think they want to. I think that given how much has been invested into the ballpark, into the team, it's really, again, the opposite of what they want to do. But you've got to make baseball decisions based on the team, not the building you just renovated.
Would it not be selling low on both of those guys though?
I just don't think that their value is going to get much higher because you're losing service time at the same time. It's kind of like there's a apex you're trying to hit here where you want to get the most value,
Yeah.
but right now they're trending in the wrong direction as far as service time goes. You get 2 years of each of them. You get this off or this postseason run, and you get next season's postseason run if you're trading for either of them. So you get 2 playoff runs. That's going to increase the value, maybe not as much, but it is going to still appreciate the value as much as the quality of their play is currently depreciating it much more, I'd say, for Bo than it
Yes.
maybe is for Vlad, right?
Yeah, I mean Vlad right now, like the 133 WC plus, like the 5 home run thing is it is what it is at this point. Like you'll take him being a like 33% better than league average hitter. Obviously you want the power, but it's you can't really, sacrifice the production that he's given you recently for some power, I would say. And for Bo, like let me ask you this. If you were a general manager and let's say you're the GM of the Chicago Cubs, and you are looking for another infielder to add some offense to your mix and hopefully help you down the stretch. Would you rather trade for Bo Bichette, who has an 80 WRC plus and not looking great at the plate, not having a lot of encouraging signs? I know like things were getting better for a couple weeks there, but like this weekend, he obviously kind of reverted back to the way that we've seen him all the season. But at least you have him for this year's playoff run and next year's playoff run. Or would you rather deal for a shortstop or another infielder who only has 1 year of service control but is actually performing this season?
It's just going to be a case of what the market dictates. Like you're if you're going out and getting a rental, you're not going to
Like
pay as much probably, right?
let's
But
just toss Willie Adames on it. Would you rather trade for Willie Adames this year? He's a free agent at the end of the year, but he has 9 home runs and a 126 WRC plus and has been very good defensively as well. Or would you rather trade for Bo Bichette, who has been underperforming but has the extra year?
it's kind of two sides of the same point because in theory you're betting on a bounce back next year too, right? So I think it's kind of two sides of the same coin where you're betting on the value of the additional season exceeding the value that this hypothetical shortstop, in this case Adames, would bring your team for the next 2-3 months, right? So I think that it's going to be kind of a depends on the team. The Dodgers are probably much more likely to go out and get a Bo Bichette because they're going to put more value on things beyond this season, right? Whereas maybe a team like hell, the Blue Jays, where the core window is slam and shut, a rental becomes a little bit more of a compelling option. So I I don't know necessarily which guy is the more valuable this season because it's realistically whether you can retain a piece that's a pending free agent versus being guaranteed at least one more shot with a guy like a Bo Bichette.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Willie Adames probably isn't going to get traded. The Brewers are like 13 games above 500 and leading the division by a ton. So like that's basically the question is like, would you rather trade for Bo
Well, if
Bichette
if if
if
he
he's
was hitting,
performing well next year?
Bregman would be the comparison if he
Yeah,
was hitting, but he's not
yeah.
hitting.
To me, I would almost look at it as like if I'm I don't know, like name X contending team whose window is certainly this year. I would rather trade for the guy who's performing this season, even if it's for a rental because I want to take my shot in my window. But if I'm a team who is kind of on the build up, like maybe you want to take a shot on a Bo Bichette or something like that, because then you get that extra year and your window extends with that, even if you do lose him after the trade. But I think it's interesting to consider like what different teams would be willing to pay. Like if I was, let's say the Kansas City Royals were interested in Bo Bichette, right? Like if I was the Kansas or like again, like let's say if Bregman was hitting and the Royals were like, man, we need an extra infielder to kind of help us on our playoff run this year. If I was them, I'd probably look more at a Bo Bichette type than an Alex Bregman type because their window isn't necessarily this season. It's going to be along, Bobby Witt's path, basically. So if if I'm that team, I'm looking at Bo Bichette. But if I'm a team like, say, I think the Blue Jays are a decent example. If they were winning, and like they were kind of looking at this year as their window, then I would look at the guy who's
Can
performing this
you
year.
can maybe say even like the Yankees, although it's not as short term,
Yeah.
given obviously you've got the Judge extension, but I mean these guys are aging. You've got Soto as a pending free agent.
Or like the
Sounds like maybe he'll be
Phillies.
back, but the Phillies are decent.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of teams. Listen, baseball is baseball. You don't know if you're going to be good next season or not, right?
Yeah.
Better to have a guy that you think is going to be good next year than not have a guy you think is going to be good next year. It's really a
Yeah.
question of, do you think Bo still has it? Do you think Bo has Chris Bryant-ified himself? That's really it.
That's yep, they pay people way more than us to make those kind of calls. So but anyways, he's not going to get traded anyway. So that's kind of goes
Well,
against the
listen,
point.
that's what Atkins is saying. That might not be what happens.
Yes. Like he also mentioned that they still have dialogue with those two about extensions. I think he said they're going to continue the dialogue about extensions with those two. And it's interesting because they would you extend them both right now if there was like a offer that you were a little uncomfortable with that they were willing to accept?
No,
No.
no, because right now
For both of them?
your team's not good enough. No, because I don't think that your team right now is good enough with those two as your pieces to be a legitimate contender. I think you'd be locking yourself into being a middle of the road team. I don't think that this current iteration of the Blue Jays is capable of doing really incredible things. And those two are kind of at the heart of it, right? So to overpay for them doesn't make any sense.
So if you were,
I mean, it's what you're gonna have to do if you want to keep them. Like, let's be
yeah.
very clear. You're gonna have to overpay, especially I think in the Vlad case. I think more so than maybe the Bo case, because with Bo, listen, down season, but very feasible that he, rounds back into form. With Vlad, your guess is as good as mine as to who this guy is. And you might be overpaying, you might be underpaying him. Like if he took a 8-year, 200 something $1 million deal, who's to say that he doesn't rediscover it and become an MVP again, right? I'd say that the probability of that is almost near zero, but he has it in his bag, right? So there's no right number really for him almost. With Bo, there's been so much more consistency that you're almost more comfortable with him because you've got a little bit more kind of certainty as to what exactly he is. I could not tell you who Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is. He's Luis Arias now, apparently. A couple of years ago, he was the best power hitter on the planet. Next year, he might turn into Shohei Ohtani and he might start pitching. He said something on the broadcast apparently the other day that he'd be willing to play catcher for the Blue Jays if they needed him. I can't see that scenario, but maybe he's Salvador Perez. I don't know who this guy is. I may never know who this guy is.
It's so tough. Like I couldn't imagine being the people in charge of like making these decisions as to what the future of the organization is, because either you've got to trade away these two extremely talented baseball players to rebuild your farm system, or you have to extend them not being 100% certain that they are World Series caliber or World Series team leaders. You know what I'm saying? That like the type of players that can carry you to the World Series and win it.
They so deeply need an infusion of talent from their minor leagues, and maybe that's literally just a case of it's a couple of years of mediocrity and they've got to hit on a couple of draft picks, and maybe this team, maybe they don't win in the Vlad and Bo window, but you hang on to them and you win with them as supplementary pieces, but you're going to be overpaying them to be supplementary pieces. So you're kind of in a bit of a pickle, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, one of those, like we can talk about like a little bit of the farm system stuff. Arjun Nimala, he's coming back today. He's joining the FCL Blue Jays in the Complex League, which like we already had the Arjun Amala conversation. As far as like, I kind of saw the other day like somebody rehashing the Blue Jays draft failures basically with their first round picks, and where the last first round pick to like actually make an impact on the team. Of course, it's Alek Manoah, but before that, you got to go way back to really find somebody that's been a difference maker at the major league level. And how confident, again, like it comes back to the GM conversation, where if this team is going to rebuild going forward, do you trust the guys who have been drafting and the ones who have been making the decisions to lead that after what has ultimately amounted to a couple of playoff appearances with no wins, and this season, which has been a big load of garbage,
Yeah.
we'll say.
Well, I actually think that it's an interesting thing to think about too is development, because I think that the draft picks are the first part of it, is identifying the player. But most of the time, I mean, teams like the cream of the crop, the best drafting teams in the league, teams like the Astros for a number of years, obviously the Dodgers, the Rays, in recent years, the Orioles. It's their ability to develop talent outside the first round. Also, that is the kind of the engine driving the success. Like, in Baltimore, obviously, you've got guys like Jackson Holiday, and you've got guys like Adley Rutschman that were number one picks. But Gunnar Henderson was a second rounder, if I recall correctly,
Yeah.
right? Like even for the Blue Jays, Bo Bichette was a second rounder, right? Like,
Yeah.
your best player doesn't have to be your first round pick. I think it's the lack of talent from the high picks that's more of a red flag, even than just the firsts.
Yeah. I mean, like you can even think about the guys that they've traded away, right? Like they had some high picks, like Austin Martin. Is his developmental failure on him, or is it because he just wasn't a major league hitter? But at the time, I mean, everybody was super hyped up about that pick, right? Like he was, they picked him fourth, right? And, or was it fifth?
They picked him fifth. But
Like top five, right?
here's a
Like, but
good
is that on them or is that on him for kind of not living up to that?
like it's both. But here's a good example. You traded Mitch White for Nick Frasso. Nick Frasso at the time, higher pick, not the highest pick, but like a good prospect enough, and gets dealt to the Dodgers and becomes a top 100 prospect. Obviously, this year has been dealing with injuries, so his trajectory is in question, I guess we'll call it. But it's the ability to identify those guys and then churn those. They turned Mitch White into a top 100 prospect, right? Like the Blue Jays turned Santiago Espinal into nobody. And I don't expect them to turn Santiago Espinal into somebody, right? But it's the fact that they haven't been able to churn guys that is, and then turning these fringy guys into really talented players, that's your problem, right? That it's because your farm system, you get one first round pick a year, sometimes two with the competitive balance stuff. You get 20 draft picks total. You cannot be pumping out zero major leaguers or two major leaguers or one major leaguer. You need to be producing a pipeline of these guys that are either guys you can trade, which is what they've been able to do. You talk about a guy like a Jose Barrios, or develop, but they haven't developed anybody.
I mean, Santiago Espinal trade, they got Chris McElvain. He's got a sub-3 ERA at high A.
Like, if he's going to become a top 100 prospect, then sure. I just remain skeptical.
Yeah, he hasn't exactly got the peripherals to go along with that ERA, we'll say. So, um, and he's a little old for the level. He's 23. So,
Well, like, again, it's just a case of the Blue Jays are going to have to figure out how to bring in and infuse some talent into this team. And ideally, they do so without having to move Vlad and Bo. And if they fail to do so, then I think that those two ultimately become pieces you have to move in order to restock the farm system, because there's not a lot of cheap talent coming up the pipeline to supplement this core.
it's interesting sorry, it will be interesting to see what kind of trades, because we haven't seen them make the major leaguer for prospect trade all that much, right? Like the Santiago Espinal one, like sure, like that's an example, but we haven't seen them be sellers in a while, right? So what are it? I mean, if they go out and do take this approach of retooling for 2025 or just full rebuild, like are they going to be trading the Yusei Kikuchis, the Danny Janssens, the Jimmy Garcias for lottery tickets, kind of like some of the younger guys with really high potential, or are they going to be trading them for some dudes closer to the majors who they feel like can be impact players or major leaguers in a couple of years? I think that will be a really interesting test of this front office for sure.
The one trade that I come back to, and then there's as well kind of a quote to go along with it that I think are going to be very telling if this is still their attitude. If I recall correctly, I believe that it was the 2018, might have been the 2019, excuse me, 2017, 2018. It was somewhere in that ballpark. You'll have to forgive me. Blue Jays trade J Happ for Billy McKinney on the doorstep, failed 100, top 100 prospect at the time. Obviously, we know where he ends up, bounces around, a bit of a journeyman. And Brandon Drury, another guy, fringy, quadruple A at the time, kind of on the cusp. Plays for the Blue Jays a little while, bounces around, doesn't turn into anything. And J Happ at the time was in the midst of a good season. Like he was striking out 10 guys per nine, like a 3.84 FIP at the time. Like he was doing well as an all-star. It was the 2018 season. And around that time, it might have even been that same off season. There was all this talk at the final, trade deadline press conference about Ross Atkins kind of being like, we gained 50 years of service time, 50 years of team control this trade deadline. So if they're just going to indiscriminately just chuck darts at okay, not great players and be satisfied with just picking up service time, then it's kind of like, what are we doing here? And that's
I
really, I think, what it's going to be.
I mean, well, hopefully not. But I mean, like when you're looking at like Yusei Kikuchi, Danny Jansen, and Jimmy Garcia, like those three, like you could probably get, if not top 100 guys, probably like top 150 guys for all three of them, right? And if they choose to kind of go against that and deal them for like say like a package of guys, like if you're approaching this deadline, I think you need to restock the top of the farm system like with better prospects than trying to go for the quantity over quality deals.
Yeah, and we'll see if that's how they operate. I mean, maybe the Blue Jays now, they see themselves as big market, big spenders, and they can go out and try to go out and get a really talented prospect instead of trying to, spread the wealth along a number of guys. I just don't know if that's what's going to happen. I just think that we've seen how this front office operates. And if they do get the opportunity to sell, who knows if they will? Seems like they might go the quantity over quality route, which wouldn't be the most enticing of deadlines.
It's kind of funny because or at least I've resisted the let's talk about trades aspect of this season, and I feel like this is the first time we've kind of really gotten into it. So
Listen,
like we're
if Ross Atkins is gonna jump on the radio and be like, we won't trade them, well then who
yeah.
will you trade? Because this team as it stands right now, not good enough.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it on Friday when we kind of did the City Connect thing about what the window is this season for making that decision, and I really do think that like Canada Day is going to be when we know what is going to happen, because there's a lot of games between now and then, and I if they stick around 500 leading into Canada Day at the end of the month, do you think that that leads to a retool, or do you think that that leads them to kind of sticking with it?
I would think it's probably a sell off. I would think probably you're looking at moving guys like a Jimmy Garcia. I think you maybe explore Jordan Romano. I mean, if he's healthy, and we'll talk about that
Yeah.
in a moment. But I mean, you look at maybe moving off some bullpen pieces. And then from there, listen, you're maybe looking at a Jansen trade. You're looking at these guys that are kind of supplementing the core. Because if you're around 500 at Canada Day, what kind of run do you have to go on to be a team that's going to be a wild card contender? If you have to win 88 games or so, like you did last year, and you are 45 and 45 or somewhere in that ballpark, what kind of second half of the season do you have to be in the mix? Like we're talking like a 40 and 20 something record, something obscene like that, right? And it's just not something that this team looks like it's capable of.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it right now, just at the projected standings, and for them to the last projected wild card team here is 86 wins. So to get to 87 wins, like they have got to really get going. And even over this stretch against poor teams where you go 8-5, like that's not even good enough. Like if they were to play 8-5 baseball over every 13 game stretch for the rest of the season, they wouldn't make the playoffs. And they were playing the White Sox, the Tigers, and the Pirates over that. So
Yeah, it's time to have a serious discussion about what this team looks like, because they have
yeah,
really less than 30 days to decide what's going on with this team and this core. And as things stand, things cannot remain the way they have been.
yep. It's gonna be interesting. It's funny that their playoff odds have gone up. I would say like they're at 21% right now compared to 17 after the Tigers series. Um, but they've at least jumped the Red Sox and Rays. I think it's, we've kind of said that all along, and I feel like each episode we're kind of getting to the point where we're like, well, we'll see how it goes after this stretch, and then they play like okay after that stretch, and then they're like, okay, well, we'll see how it goes after this stretch. But I really do think that they are running out of these stretches to watch out for and see what the year is going to be.
Yeah, and it's not getting any easier. I mean, I just mentioned, let's talk a little bit of Romano here. I mean, the
Yeah.
elbow injury now, it's the second time he's going to be hitting the injured list because of an elbow injury, and that doesn't help the cause. I mean, you've just lost your closer. Not that he's been that good this year, but still.
I mean, he's been like one of the better closers in baseball for a long period of time, and it's kind of one of those things where you feel like he would eventually straighten things out a little bit, figure it out, but like it's going to be a huge test on their bullpen this week because not only are they down Alek Manoah, which likely results in Bowden Francis joining the team, which hasn't gone well with him as a starter this year, which is of course a test on their bullpen, but they're going to be playing in some high leverage situations, I would imagine, against some of these better teams who, like Brendan Little is currently in the major league bullpen. Their bullpen, like if I told you at the beginning of the season, hey, on June 3rd, the bullpen is going to be Trevor Richards, Tim Meza, Jimmy Garcia, Chad Green, Yenesis Cabrera, Zach Pop, Nate Pearson, and Brendan Little. Like, yeah, exactly. Like
It's not it's not good. It's not good. It's not good.
you're not feeling great about that. So I'm interested to see like Yariel when he comes back as well, because that would be nice if you get him back into the rotation and then you can kind of move Bowden to the bullpen. But it's going to be a heck of a stretch for the bullpen without Romano.
I guess we'll see. Well, they got the Orioles coming up, and I mean that's going to be about as tough as it gets. Like we can talk a little Orioles here now because
Yeah.
I mean, like this is going to be a huge test.
The Orioles. I mean, we've seen the Orioles so much the past 2 years, and they are scary. Like Kimbrel's kind of figured it out now too, and I like the Jays played them super tight the last time when they had that game canceled, but and of course like it was the Adley walk-off home run that prevented them from taking both of those games and sweeping the Orioles. But that team, I mean, they're getting Connor Norby this week, and it's just
It does not get easier. It does
no,
not get easier.
no, they are going to be up against it, and it's man, it's so crazy just to think about like this Orioles team and where they've come from like a few years ago, just being like so bad, and how well that they've developed and drafted and everything that we just talked about.
It's what the Blue Jays were supposed to do. Needless to say, it's not what happened.
I mean, yeah, if they do end up like kind of retooling a little bit this year and they trade away like Trevor Richards, Jimmy Garcia, um, name whoever else they trade, like the bullpen could be in for a tough second half of the season if that ends up like that's where we're looking at like the Hagen Danners, probably some guys coming up from AAA, like that'll be Mason Fluharty, like let's get him up,
Check your inbox, folks. You might be called up next.
It's gonna be interesting. For the Orioles, I mean, pitching this week, I know they got Burns. Burns is scheduled to pitch Tuesday. G-Rod today. You have any specific thoughts on this series other than it's gonna be tough?
It's just don't get mopped. I think that's really all I'm asking. It'd be nice if the Jays could split. It'd be nice if they could win the series. I would be very, very surprised if the Blue Jays mustered more than a combined 5 runs in these first 2 games. They are going to have to find a way to hit, and they're going to have to put together some of their most productive offensive showings here, because the pitching is going to be just nails, and they are going to have to really, really tough it out. And not to mention, you got an Alek Manoah, would have been start. Now, obviously, no longer the case. So who knows exactly how that one's going to go.
Oh, I forgot to mention Ryan Burr. Ryan Burr's in the bullpen right now, too. How can I forget that? Very exciting.
Oh, brother.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure you drop a follow or review wherever you get your pods. Like and subscribe on YouTube. We're there at Bird's Eye View Pod. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jori is at J Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEV_pod. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the games this week.